fused with has to follow them there on that roller coaster journey. But when there's a fused relationship, that's what's happening. Good. One more question about the genogram before I move on. Yes? Why does Jeff get along with everyone except for James, right? I love this question. Okay, this is good. Why does Jeff get along with Roberto and with Philip? There's some distance here, and there's some distance here. But you're asking, why does he get along with these two? Let's make some guesses. I'll make the first guess, and maybe someone else can add on. We're going to improv this. So he's distanced from his biological father. Do we see that? And maybe when he partnered with Sophia, he found another father replacement, his father-in-law. So now he had father-in-law. But because he was so close with his father-in-law, notice how his father-in-law is a little bit distant from his eldest daughter, Sophia, which is the partner of Jeff. So now we have this really close relationship between son-in-law and father-in-law, and they're almost closer than they are to the biological daughter and his partner. What's another reason that this sort of thing could be happening? What else do you notice up here? What's happening in the family? Okay, tell me more.
Jeff and Roberto both take sides against Sophia.
Okay, that's a possibility. Yep. Mm-hmm. So they're going to have. They always have each other's back. And it's really easy to see this person as the person who's not up to snuff, because they're distant from this person. Notice how there's this pattern of abuse here, and maybe Roxy never learned what it was like to be in a safe, stable relationship. And so because of that, she operates all of her other relationships from this place of instability, because she never had this safe place. So to her sister-in-law, Christy, there's some abuse. There's abuse down to her son and her daughter. Maybe it's because she learned that from Gladys, right? This is just how we operate in our family. So oftentimes we learn certain dance steps in our family of origin, and we continue those exact same dance steps. That's how you're going to teach the next generation how to make the pancake. It's 2 eggs, and that's how we do it. Same sort of thing here. This is how we do relationship. We learn about that in our family of origin, and then we just play Xerox, copycat, monkey see, monkey do, and we replicate that same sort of behavior in the following generation. Should I ask for another question, or should I move on? Okay, I'm going to take no hands as indicative that I should move on. Okay, here we go. It will take every triggered nerve, every tremble in your voice, every butterfly in your belly, and every rejoicing ancestor for you to say, no, I'm not doing this anymore. When there's been a pattern that has been passed down to you for generations, it's been practiced and honed, and this is what we do. It's going to take every nerve in your body to only crack one egg for the pancakes when everyone is watching, because they're always expecting for that second egg. And if you don't do that second egg, they're going to tell you about it, right? They're going to let you know. So when you're trying to, I'm going to get some tingles, some butterflies, in my tummy, and some, when you're trying to make changes different from your family of origin, it takes a lot of guts, a lot of courage, and a lot of intentionality. This doesn't happen on accident. So we're going to be talking about stress and anxiety. We experience them very similarly. There are some important differences, but tonight I'll be using them interchangeably. But if you want to know some of the differences, when I'm stressed about something, let's say I'm stressed about taxes, once I'm done with the taxes, my stress goes away. When I'm anxious, I can't necessarily pinpoint what I'm anxious about. I just know that I'm anxious. So stress usually have a very specific cause, whereas anxiety is a little bit more general. I'll be using them interchangeably because we physiologically experience stress and anxiety in a very similar way. So all that being said, we pass on stress and anxiety from person to person to person, and we also learn in our family of origin how we handle distress. What's the proper way to make pancakes? With 2 eggs. What's the proper way to handle distress? We do this, or we do this. Maybe we work really hard. We throw ourselves into work, or maybe there's an addiction, or we throw ourselves into sports, or into hobbies, or maybe we fight a lot, or maybe we're quiet, or maybe we walk on eggshells. We also learn how to handle distress in our family of origin. So it's not just the anxiety that is passed from person to person, but how we are supposed to make the pancakes, how we're supposed to handle that anxiety that is also passed along like a precious family heirloom. So this evening, Here's what I'm interested in. I'm interested in what are some of the family rules in Abraham's family? What are the intergenerational patterns of behavior? That's just a fancy word for what are the patterns that are passed down from generation, then repeated the next generation, repeated the next generation? How do people handle anxiety and tension and distress? How do they handle that? Who are the villains in the family? Who are the heroes? That's what I'm really interested in. And as we go on, I want you to think about, if you know the story, you can even, if you want to cheat, you can look in your Bibles in front of you. What chapter does the Abraham story begin? His name is first Abram, later changed to Abraham. And then who is Abram and Sarai's first son? I want you to think about this. So, here's how the story starts. Oftentimes we jump straight to the call of God to Abram in chapter 12. But the story starts a little bit before chapter 12. In fact, when you look at the original language, the Hebrew originally did not have these chapter breaks. These chapter breaks are artificially entered later on. It was just one continuous story. So when the scribes put these chapter breaks, they put a chapter break at the beginning of chapter 12, which is where we think the story starts. But the story actually starts here. And this is the first thing we learn about Abram and Sarai. We learn that Sarai was barren and she had no child. This is how the narrator wants us to learn about this family. She was barren, she had no child. Before we learn she is beautiful, we learn she is barren. Before we learn that she is his half-sister, we learn she cannot have children. This is how the narrator wants us to start out the story, that they had no children. My wife and I both did IVF for our two daughters, but we experienced some losses, some miscarriages, and it's a difficult experience, and that definitely happened in this story. When we're thinking about infertility infertility dates. So April, May, and June are sometimes difficult dates for families who've experienced loss. And tomorrow, October 15, is National Pregnancy and Infant Loss Remembrance Day. So we will definitely be talking about this because this is one of the challenges that Abraham's family experienced, and I know my own family also has experienced this. Infertility is disease or condition of the reproductive system, often diagnosed after a couple have had 1 year of unprotected, well-timed intercourse, or if the woman has suffered from multiple miscarriages and the woman is under 35 years old. If the woman is over 35 years old, let's think about Sarai, it is diagnosed after 6 months of unprotected, well-timed intercourse. So they're older, right? Sarai is not 35. There might be some biological, physiological differences several millennia ago compared to today. So if we're using a modern day description of that diagnosis of infertility, it may not necessarily fit their experience, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was too far off. 1 in 8 couples have had trouble getting pregnant or sustaining pregnancy, and 1 in 4 women will experience a miscarriage in their lifetime. This is something that is prevalent in lots of different families, and it's front and center in this biblical story, and the narrator wants us to know this right off the bat. So, this is the call of Abram. This is where people normally start. Let's listen to some of the language that God uses to call Abram, and notice the focus on the family. Go forth from your country, from your relatives, family word, to your father's house, family word, to the land which I will show you, and I will make you a great nation. Again, you can't get a great nation without your family. And I will bless you and make your name great. You shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse, and to all the families of the earth will be blessed. A lot of emphasis on family, right? And what's the other emphasis that he includes here? Land, country, earth. So land and family, those two things. This is what God is using to draw Abram and Sarai out to the wild, wild west of Canaan. Let's go back to Genesis. After the fall, after Adam and Eve eat the fruit, God comes to Adam and Eve and he talks with them. And listen to the same sort of language that he uses to talk with them that he repeats again when he talks to Abram and Sarai. Cursed is the ground because of you. In pain you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you. And you shall eat of the plants of the field by the sweat of your face. You shall eat bread till you return to the ground. For out of it you were taken, for you are dust, ground again, and dust you shall return. Let's look at the focus on the ground here. We see that? And this is the previous verse. To the woman he says, I will greatly multiply your pain in childbirth. In pain you will bring forth children. Yet your desire will be for your husband, he will rule over you. Now, I've never given birth, My wife has done that. She's a hero for that. So I'm not trying to mansplain this. When we talk about the pain of childbirth, I don't think that God is talking about the pain of delivering a baby. I think he's talking about the pain of not being able to have children. In your pain in childbirth, in pain you will bring forth children. The painful experience of trying to have children and not being able to. So the difficulty and the loss, that is what I think God is talking about. If we go back to the previous slide, when he's talking about the pain you shall eat about all the days of your life, thorns and thistles which bring forth for you, I don't think he's talking about the sweat and the bruises and the sore back and the blisters when it comes to working the land. Where does the real pain come from when you're trying to grow food? Not being able to grow food. So not being able to grow children, not being able to grow food. That's where the real pain is. So how will Abraham's family respond to these two things, these two big challenges, famine and infertility? And every single generation in the Abrahamic narrative faces these two things. And they have to figure out how they're going to respond to these challenges. Okay, so we have Abram who marries his half-sister Sarai, and he has a brother Nahor who marries his niece Milcah. So I'm going to kind of move them around. It's very similar to the previous slide, but as you know how a genogram works, I'm moving some characters around. I'm putting the females on the right. When it comes to couples, we can see how Sarah is now over here. I move Milcah up here just so we can see who's coupled with whom. How are we feeling about this? Good? Okay. So who likes emails? Raise your hand if you enjoy looking at your emails. One person here. Good. Maybe you can do all the emails for us. Who enjoys it when people are on their phone texting when you're trying to have a conversation with them? Who enjoys that? Okay. So if you like emails and text, you can thank the Sumerians because they produced the cuneiform, the first written language. So you can thank them. And that was right out of here in this area. If you like running water, you can thank them. If you like the phrase, I don't want to recreate the wheel, you can thank them because they literally created the wheel. In fact, was this thriving metropolis. The Tigris and the Euphrates were right here, which meant there was a lot of water, a lot of irrigation. They were able to grow wheat and barley at an astounding rate, so much more than the rest of the area, which meant they were able to produce more goods, which means they were able to bring in more cash and more money. The city of had running water, not just in the middle of the city, but some houses also had running water. They had stone buildings, and they had wood mantles for the door frames. This was a thriving metropolis that was rich, wealthy, had a lot of artwork. It was a great place to live, right? Very different from over here in Canaan, right? Very different. We know that Abram and Sarah, they move up here to Paddan Haran. We're going to come up here and visit this later on in the story as well. And then eventually God calls them down here through the two pieces of bait, or the hooks of family and land, right? Family and land. Come here, I promise you family and land. And I think God knows what they're interested in, because we first learned that Sarah is barren, right? So he knows what they're interested in. So, who is Abram and Sarah's first son? Who is their first son? Someone raise their hand and be brave. Who is their first son? Isaac, okay. Let's broaden the definition of son. Who is their first son? Ishmael. Okay, let's broaden the definition of son. Who is their first son? Servant. Okay, there's someone else in the family that is their son. Lot. Lot was their first son. It's clear that they adopted Lot. Back then, they didn't have the foster care system or orphanages. If parents pass away, then other family members are responsible for taking care of those children. So Lot was actually their first son, the adopted son, right? Then Ishmael, biological son of Hagar and Abraham, and then Isaac, the biological son of Abraham and Sarah. So Abram went forth as the Lord has spoken to him, and Lot went with him. The narrator's trying to make it clear. They didn't just go by themselves. They brought Lot with him. Now, Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. Abram took Sarah, his wife, and Lot, his nephew. So back-to-back verses, the narrator's like, don't miss this part. They adopted Lot. Later on, when Abram lies to Pharaoh, When Abraham goes up to Egypt's Negev, he and his wife and all that belonged to him, and Lot with him. Now Lot, who went with Abraham, it's super clear that Lot is part of this family. And sometimes we miss this because the adopted child doesn't seem like a real child of the family. And sometimes we still treat it that way here, right? Oh, that's an adopted child. But adopted children are just as much a part of the family constellation as biological children. And it was clear that Abraham had a very soft peace in his heart for Lot. Okay, so we know that Abram lies to Pharaoh, saying that my wife is actually my sister, right? That's my sister, it's not my real wife. And then they come out of that, and we see that Lot is down here. So Lot and Abram and Sarah, out of that experience down in Egypt, and the reason they were down in Egypt is because there was a famine in the land. So right off the bat, they get to Canaan, there's a famine in the land, they have to go down to Egypt. That's how they're dealing with the famine. Then Abram lies to Pharaoh about Sarah, saying it's not my wife, it's my sister, and then Pharaoh finds out about it, and then they end up leaving Egypt. But we know that in Genesis 13, 14, and 18, Abram really cares for Lot. If you remember, when they come out of Egypt, Abram lets Lot choose where to settle first. The herdsmen are having a fight, and they're having difficulty to figure out how we're going to eat the different land, the grasslands with our two herds. So Abram says, where do you want to choose? And Lot chooses the lush ground of Sodom and Gomorrah. Later on, Abram rescues Lot. Later on, chapter 14, we have the 4 kings from the east coming to Sodom and Gomorrah and saying, you have not paid the taxes, we're going to take you, takes everyone's slave, and starts running away. So Abram and his buddies chase after them, even though he is vastly outnumbered, to save Lot. So he's going into the situation where he is vastly outnumbered to save Lot. And then we know that Abraham bargains with God to save Lot's life. All right? Abram is really interested in protecting Lot, just like you would a son. In fact, he was. He was the first son. And Abram said, "O Lord God, what will you give me since I am childless?" So he identifies himself as childless, which is interesting because he's thinking of his own biological children, because the idea was you pass on your seed through your biological children. So even though he had an adopted son to take care of, back in that time, he was still interested in having his own child. "You've given me no offspring, one born in my house who is my heir." So they decide to bring Hagar into the mix. It was Sarah's idea, right? I'm barren, I'm pregnant. I'm not able to get pregnant. Let's bring Hagar into the mix and see if we can find a child through that way, right? And there's some mistreatment here, and then Hagar runs away. And the question here is the desperateness of infertility and pursuit of IVF at the time that Sarah was doing. We give Sarah a really hard time about this, right? She wasn't faithful to God, right? If she would have just waited a little bit longer, then she could have experienced God's blessing through Isaac. We seem to give her a really hard time. Why do you think we do that? Say it again. Always blame the woman. Yes, that's something that seems to happen sometimes, right? Always blame the woman. That's the way it's always been. And notice it's Sarah who's barren, as if Abraham had nothing to do with it. Now later on, Abraham did have some other wives, but infertility can happen in the male or the female, right? It's not just always the female that experiences infertility. Good. If you remember later on in the story, Rebecca, so the next generation, brings a nurse with her, someone to help her. And we know that Leah and Rachel also bring their maidservants with them, right? To make sure that they can have children, right? So in the subsequent generations, it's okay for other women to participate in trying to have children, but not okay for Sarah. This is bad. Now it's clear that the author is interested in talking about polygamy, and all throughout the Old Testament, polygamy is not seen as something that is healthy in the family, but I'm wondering if polygamy, part of the reason for this is to try and circumvent some of this infertility experience. If there's more people part of the group that can try and have children, then we can avoid some of the barrenness. Now, so far I've been talking quite a bit about just the family stuff. And at this point in time, you might be thinking, now, Brian, you haven't talked about God at all. Why is that? Obviously, the book of Genesis was written to describe God's character, right? And God's character in contrast to the character of humanity, right? Very clear. God is creator. God is savior, the atonement, So all the theology around God is very clear. We know that. But I'm trying to highlight the family stuff, and I promise I'll circle back around to talk about theology and the character of God at the end of this presentation. I'm not ignoring God. I'm just trying to show you what's happening in the family, because the narrator, as he's describing what's happening as Genesis unfolds, he shows a lot of indelicate family drama, right? For a book about God and humanity, there's a lot of messiness and muddiness that the narrator chooses to show us in this unguarded view of Abraham's family. So we're going to take advantage of that to look at that family. And if we see those patterns, maybe we can start to see patterns in our own family as well. So we know that Hagar, she becomes pregnant, and she runs away. But then obviously, later on, she comes on back. And I'm curious if anyone knows off the top of their head who the biological mothers were of the 12 children of Israel, the 12 children of Isaac. Does anyone remember? Huh?
4 women.
The 4 women. We had good 4 women. Now, amongst those 4 women, who were the sons from each of those 4 women? Good. We know that one. Right. Benjamin and Joseph. Those are from Rachel. That's clear. How about the others? Not as easy. It's not as easy because there's 12 of them? Or not as easy because we don't make as big of a distinction about who the biological mother was later on in the story? Whereas here we make a big distinction around, this is Ishmael. And then there's Isaac later on. We make a big distinction here, but later on in the story, we don't make as big of a distinction. It's just the 12 sons. Do you see that? So even our bias towards this changes just 2 generations later. If you wanted to know, here are the biological sons related to the biological mothers. If you wanted to see that, I'll let you look at this for a minute, and then I'm going to carry on, because this is not the main point, but there is a way to figure it out. But I just want to point out that we don't necessarily make those big distinctions when it comes to later on down the line in the Abrahamic narratives. Okay, so Hagar gives birth. Sarah is not mentioned of being present at the birth, right? This is clearly Hagar's baby. Sarah wants nothing to do with this. So already in this family, we have a parent who wants nothing to do with that child, right? We know that Hagar is running south down here to Egypt, back to her homeland. God sends her back, and there's a name change in chapter 17. There's name changes from Sarai and Abram to Sarah and Abraham. There's still conflict here and more infertility. So even though Ishmael came, Sarah is still experiencing infertility. So she has to watch this unfold. She has to watch this other wife have a child, and she's still not able to. So front and center, she's facing the pain of this infertility playing out right in front of her. When Abraham talks with God and he tries to negotiate, he goes from 50 all the way down. If there's just 10 people in Sodom and Gomorrah, will you save that city? Because he's desperate to try and save Lot's life. There we go. Abraham is not a morning person. There are only 3 times in the story where Abraham gets up early. And the narrator, when he's telling the story slows way down, and he uses lots of verbs and words to describe a little tiny scene. Here is the 3rd time, that Abraham gets up early. So Abraham rose early in the morning and saddled his donkey and took 2 of his young men with him and Isaac his son, and he split wood for the burnt offering and arose and went to the place which God had told him. So there are 6 different verbs in red here, and Abraham is doing all of them. This person is a wealthy patriarch. He does not need to be doing those activities. Other people can do this, right? But he is taking upon himself to rise early in the morning to do all of these things to take Isaac up to Mount Moriah, because there's a chance this could be the last time that he's with his son. The 2nd time, Abraham gets up early in the morning. So Abraham rose early in the morning, the same phrase, right? And he took bread and the skin of water and gave them to Hagar, putting them on her shoulder, and gave her the boy, Ishmael, and sent her away. The same thing. He does not need to be the one to get all these things ready, but he chooses to do so because this is an important point in his life. This might be the last time that he sees his son Ishmael. He's about to send them off to the desert. Here's the first time that we see Abraham get up early in the morning. So Abraham arose early in the morning and went to the place where he had stood before the Lord, where he had bartered with God for Lot's life. And he looked down towards Sodom and Gomorrah, and he looked toward all the land of the valley, and he saw, and behold, the smoke of the land ascended like the smoke of the furnace. So he was getting up early in the morning to see the results of what happened. Is his son going to be alive or dead? So it's clear that Abraham cares about Lot, he cares about Ishmael, and he also cares about Isaac. Later on, Abraham lies again, uses the same exact lie to King Abimelech, which is like the king of the Philistines, just like Pharaoh is the king of Egypt. Use the same exact lie. He's not very creative. Oh, this is my sister, not my wife. And Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech and his wife and his maid so that they bore children. Genesis 20, verse 18, for the Lord had closed fast the wombs of the household of Abimelech because of Sarah, Abraham's wife. So it's clear that infertility is seen as a curse, as a punishment, something that we don't like. And it's not just Abraham's family. Culturally, in this time, this is something that people are concerned about. Even fringe characters are concerned about this. So Lot's daughters, right? They get him to drink some alcohol, and then they have relations with him because they are interested in not being barren. Everyone wants to do whatever they can to avoid this barrenness. And God said this was going to be a challenge, right? He told Adam and Eve, this is going to be a challenge. In pain, you will bring forth children. He knew this was going to be painful for the families. So, Hagar and Ishmael are cut off from the family. They're sent away. Then there's the binding of Isaac. So the binding of Isaac, when Abraham takes Isaac up to the top of Mount Moriah, and just when he's about to sacrifice him, behold, there's a ram, right, to sacrifice instead of Isaac. And we know that Big Daddy Abraham comes down the mountain with his servants. And the very next verse, we have this little interlude that the narrator brings forth. It's kind of like, and meanwhile, while this is happening, back at the ranch, something else is going on. And this narrator is saying, and after this huge mountaintop Mount Moriah experience, the narrator immediately says, and back at the ranch, there's these other people, including this father of Rebekah. So the narrator is trying to say, okay, this big mountaintop experience, but back at the ranch, back up at Paddan Aram, there's this person named Rebekah, and that's important for us to know. And then the very next verse, so here's Rebekah. If we're looking at the family tree, the authors gave us all of this important family information so that we could locate Rebekah in her family tree. So even the author is interested in us knowing what this family tree is like. So very next chapter in 23, Sarah passes away. So Mount Moriah, interlude back at the ranch, Rebekah. Very next chapter, Sarah passes away. This is really interesting to me because we're looking at this. So here's the second, 22:19. So Abram returned with his young men. Here's back at the ranch with Rebekah. The very next verse, now Sarah lived 127 years. There's the years of the life of Sarah. Sarah died in Kiriath-Arba. This is Hebron in the land of Canaan. And Abram came in to mourn for Sarah. The other way you can translate this is Abraham came up to mourn for Sarah and to weep for her. Abraham always refers to her as my dead. Only the narrator calls Sarah Abraham's wife. So what's happening here? I don't exactly know, but it's interesting because Abraham goes back to Beersheba, back at the ranch with Rebekah, and then Sarah dies in Hebron. What does this mean? So here's Beersheba. This is where Abraham went. Sarah dies up here, 26.4 miles away. Now, there's a lot we don't know. Sometimes the narrator doesn't care about time as much as we do. But it's interesting that Abraham goes to Beersheba, Rebekah back at the ranch, and the next thing we hear about is Hebron and Sarah passing away there. So I took Google Maps. Here's Beersheba and Hebron up here on the top right. And this is 26.57 miles. And then here's the Nampa SDA Church. And then here's up here at Black Canyon Plaza. I don't know if that's a place you know, but on the map, that was about the same distance. So that would mean Abraham returned back to Nampa SDA, back at the ranch with Rebekah, and the next thing we know, Sarah passes away up here. Why did Sarah pass away at a different location? I don't know. I have some guesses, but I don't know. she has had a challenging life, right? She lived in the metropolis of Ur. She had the comfort, the luxuries of running water. Then she goes to the wild, wild west. Not the same sort of running water. Instead, you're digging wells, right? She's had a lot of years of infertility, had a lot of challenges. There's no mention of the story of Mount Moriah when Abraham takes Isaac up to the mountain. Sarah is not mentioned in that story at all. So I don't know what's going on here. She's had difficulties with her other partner wife, Hagar. She's had to kick her other son, which she wouldn't identify as a son, Ishmael, out of the family. She's had some difficulties. Not only that, but Abraham has lied about her twice, about her being his sister, and she was taken to the harem of Abimelech as well as Pharaoh. So I don't know what's happening for her, but I know that there must have been some tension in that relationship, right? So I don't know all the reasons why she dies in a different place, and there's a chance, because they're nomadic, they travel around, maybe the whole family was up there, but it almost feels like the narrator is specifically trying to show that there's some distance, maybe emotional distance represented in the physical distance, if that makes sense. I don't know if that's actually happening, but that seems to be the potential. All right, back to Genesis 24. Genesis 24, Abraham tells his trusted servant, we need to find a wife for Isaac now, huh? Shouldn't we do that? We find a wife for Isaac? So he sends his servant back to Paddan, back at the ranch where Rebekah is, so everyone else who's reading the story knows where the servant is going. Even though the servant doesn't necessarily know who he's going to find, we know who he's going to find because the narrator has already told us there's someone specific over there. There's the promise. Will you please promise, put your hand under my thigh, that you will find a wife for my son Isaac? Then there's the quest. The servant goes out. There's the well. He sees Rebekah. Rebekah takes care of him and his camels. Then there's a message to Rebekah's family. Then there's a moment, Rebekah, will you please go back with my family? And then Isaac finally brings her into his mother's tent. So when the servant brings Rebekah back, Rebekah lifts up her eyes. She sees Isaac. Isaac takes her into his tent. And he took Rebekah, and she became his wife, and he loved her. Thus, Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. So, in this story about Isaac and Rebekah, the narrator is very clear. He also wants to introduce another character. And that character is Laban, the brother of Rebekah. And we know about Laban because what happens? Rebekah comes back after she says, there's this servant, and I gave him some water, and he's from this other place, and his master Abraham. In fact, all the conversations about Abraham, not very much about Isaac. There's a person who has all these camels, and as soon as Laban hears about all these camels, he runs out to meet this person. It's almost like Rebekah comes, oh, there's this person that came to see me, and maybe there's a chance there could be a relationship work out, and he has this fleet of Teslas, and then he runs out to see this person. He's suddenly interested in who this person is. So we know a little bit about who Laban is. He's interested in wealth, right? And running is not something you would normally do during that time. So he's willing to make a show. He's willing to break certain barriers in order to ingratiate himself towards someone who might have some wealth and some property. So we know, oh, that's interesting about Laban. But we know that Laban and Rebekah come from the same family, right? So there's a chance they learn some of the same sort of things that are important to them. Because different families have different things that are important to them. Some families you have to make sure you do the dishes after every single meal. Some families, you have to wash the car every single week, and you have to wax the car, because that's when we take care of our vehicles. Some families, they only want fresh produce. That's just what this family does. So if we know something about Laban, there's also a hint, maybe this tells us something about Rebekah as well, which we will see later on. Genesis 25, Abraham takes another wife. He sends all of his other sons from the other wives away. So Isaac is all by himself. Oh no. This is supposed to slowly. Okay. It's okay. All right. So this person is Mark Wahlberg, and he's seen the inside of a gym before, right? Here's Anthony Mack, and here's The Rock, Dwayne Johnson. They have big shoulders. They are scary big guys, right? Is there a way we can change this? Okay, not a big deal. Okay, so what I was going to show you is this person is an NFL football player. He's like 6'4", but over here in this picture, he looks like he's 14 years old, right? Because he's up against this tall person. These two individuals, you can barely even see this person's head. He's cut off. He looks like a big guy here, but standing against these other two tall people, he doesn't look that big. Why am I trying to show you this? The context in which we grow up in shapes the way other people see us. If I am in a family and everyone else is an amazing musician, and I'm just a mediocre musician, I'm not going to be seen as that great of a musician because everyone else is amazing at the piano and the harp and the flute and the trombone and the ukulele and the guitar and the banjo, and I just kind of play the harmonica and that's it. Whereas in another context, I can rip on that harmonica, but amongst the context of my family members, they're really musically talented, so I don't look like I'm as musically gifted. I think this is what happens with Isaac. Sometimes Isaac is seen as passive. He doesn't do as much. We have Big Daddy Abraham. Then we have Jacob, who gets into all of his adventures. He wrestles with God. His name is changed to Israel. He has 12 sons. Then we have Joseph. Who can forget about Joseph? Going down to Egypt, becomes the viceroy of Egypt. But Isaac, what does Isaac do? Not much. He gets tricked. Some people call him milk toast, like this bland white toast, as if he doesn't do very much. And part of the reason is he's not given as much screen time as everyone else. There's many chapters about Abraham, many chapters about Jacob, many chapters about Joseph, but not very many chapters about Isaac. So sometimes it's easy to see Isaac as someone who's not as musically talented as everyone else in the family. Okay, we'll talk about this coming up. So Abraham dies, and Ishmael defies. We know that Ishmael is someone who's defiant. Infertility again in the following generation. So we have Isaac's prayer. Isaac is the only patriarch who prays to God. We have other people complaining to God, but he's the only one who prays to God about the infertility. Then there's the fears of the fighting twins. So later Isaac prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife. He's the only patriarch to do this because she was barren, and the Lord heard his, well, at least I'm sure the others did, but it's the only one who is mentioned in the narrative actually doing that. And the Lord heard his prayer, and his wife Rebekah conceived. But the children inside of her struggled within each other, and she said, "Why is this happening to me?" So imagine if you had difficulty getting pregnant, and you finally get pregnant, and all of a sudden these two are fighting inside of you. Uh-oh, this is not good. Maybe I've been down this road before. This is not a good sign. So Rebekah cries out, "Why is this happening to me? I've been waiting so long to get pregnant, and why is this happening? It's happening again," right? So Rebekah went to inquire of the Lord, and he declared to her, "Two nations are in your womb, and two people from within you will be separated. One people will be stronger than the other. The older will serve the younger." So we know this, right? The older will serve the younger. There are going to be two people. There's going to be some conflict between them. So we know this going into the next story. If you want to take out your smartphones, you can take an image of this. This is an ultrasound of two babies actually moving. It looks like they're fighting in the womb. So this is what Rebekah would have experienced inside of her. So this is something you're interested in. You can look at it now, or you can look at the recording later on. So we know that there's twins, right? Esau and Jacob. How are we feeling with understanding how these people are related together in the genogram? Feeling pretty good? Like we could track that Bethuel is married to this no-name person who is the father of Laban. Laban is the eldest son. Then Rebekah is the youngest daughter. Rebekah is coupled with Isaac, and then they have twins down here. Hopefully we're tracking this as we go along. Then there's clear parent favoritism. The reason I showed you the genogram at the beginning of this presentation is I wanted you to see how sometimes one parent is closer to a certain child, and the opposite parent might be closer to the other child. But this goes beyond just close, but like severe favoritism, right? And this starts to break apart the family. When her time came to give birth, there were indeed twins within her womb. The first one came out red, covered with hair like a fur coat, and they named him Esau. And later on, Esau is described as like this caveman. "I hunt, I want red soup, give me now." As if he's someone who's not quite as cultured as Jacob. And Jacob wants to do things the easy way. In fact, he's holding onto Esau's heel so he can come out easier, right? Because when the nurse pulls the baby out, I'm just going to let someone else pull me out as well. So he's always looking for the easy way out. So he was named Jacob, and Isaac was 60 years old when his twins were born. When the boys grew up, Esau became a skillful hunter. "I hunt. I harry, I red," a man of the field, while Jacob was a quiet man, a sophisticated individual, a man of the tents, who stayed at home. Because Isaac had a taste for wild game, he loved Esau. Rebekah loved Jacob. So there was a clear preference into who they would support, right? So the narrators wanted to make us clear that they did not love their children equally. Now, is it possible to love your children equally? I don't know. I have 2 daughters, and I love them both, but I love them different, right? But this is not loving both are different. It's clear favoritism towards one. But Rebekah loved Jacob as if there was a clear preference for one, and maybe not as close to the other. As a therapist, I sometimes wonder what it would be like having these people of Abraham in the therapy room with me, and what some of our conversations would be like. Now, I'm not saying that I would know how to fix or change the situation, but I just wonder what some of their conversations would be like around what's important to them. Because when people come into the therapy room with me, they talk about what's important. Otherwise, we're wasting our time, right? And it's clear that Esau didn't see the birthright as important as Jacob did. And that definitely plays out. Swear to me first, Jacob said. So Esau swore to Jacob and sold him the birthright. Then Jacob gave some bread and lentil stew to Esau, who ate and drank, then got up and went away. Thus Esau despised his birthright. This is often seen as a critique on Esau. I hunt, I want food, give me now, as if he's a bad person. But back then, there were no McDonald's, no Taco Bells, no Airbnbs, no Motel 6. You had to rely on the hospitality of other people to survive if you were traveling, right? You had to hope that other people would be able to give you a place to sleep, some food either you could barter for or pay money for or for free. And so hospitality was a big value in that culture because we could not survive without hospitality. So we have this picture of these twin boys, and one boy, I say young man, Jacob, has some stew, right? He has some stew. And back then, you didn't make cup of noodle soup or Kraft macaroni and cheese. If you're going to cook, you're going to cook for everyone. You're going to make a big pan of lasagna and put that in the oven and then pull it out so everyone can eat. So either he's pulled out this big pan of lasagna, this big pot of soup, and everyone has already eaten and this is the leftovers, or it's full to the brim and people are about to eat, or they're in the middle of eating. Whatever the case, there's plenty of food for everyone, right? So why is he charging such a high price to his brother? I think this is a critique of Jacob and how he's not willing to be hospitable even to his biological twin. He's trying to take advantage of the situation. So I wonder, did Esau despise his birthright after this transaction or before this transaction? Every behavior is a symptom of the system. We knew that Esau liked to go out and hunt. He wanted to be away from the tents and do that wild stuff, caveman stuff. If he's the eldest son and he gains the birthright, he's going to get more resources than Jacob, and then he's going to be responsible for the family after his father passes away. But maybe he likes to go out and hunt. Maybe he doesn't want to be chafed and shackled down with the responsibilities of the tent life. Maybe he despised the birthright before this transaction. So I think it can go both ways, the way the narrator describes it. Thus, could be therefore, Esau despised his birthright, or thus, this is an example of Esau despising his birthright. So we don't know if he despised it before or after. I think go both ways. For me personally, I like the idea, I lean towards the idea that Esau maybe wasn't as interested in some of these household tent holds things as much as Jacob was. Okay, so here's how the birthright works out. If there are 10 sons over on the left-hand side, you take the firstborn gets one portion, then they get an additional portion because of the firstborn, and everything else is divided up against the rest of the 9 sons. So the eldest son gets a double portion, and then everyone divides up what's left. If there are 2 children in the family, the eldest son gets his portion plus a second portion, and then the younger son gets whatever's left over. So what's happening is Jacob has this 1/3. He's trading 1/3 of his father's inheritance for 2/3 of his father's inheritance. So was this really worth a bowl of stew? No. And why would he have this exorbitant price for that unless he's planning on taking advantage of his brother. Was this planned ahead of time? Did he know when his brother usually came home from hunting? Or was he taking advantage of the immediate situation? I'm guessing he didn't charge everyone else at camp the same price for a bowl of stew. It was only his brother. So I think this is a critique on who Jacob is and what he's willing to do to get what he wants. Here is finally the one chapter where Isaac gets to shine. He tricks other people because Isaac has these different tricks. He digs wells, he grows wheat. There's also often a conflict between the city folk versus the pastoral nomads, and he's able to bridge both. There are people who are trying to take his wells away, and he keeps on giving those up. But that doesn't matter to him because he's always so wealthy, and he's so big that people try and kick him out of the way because they see him as a threat. They see him as dangerous. So now we have this situation where the youngest son now has the birthright, but not the blessing. So Isaac has two sons. He has Jacob and Esau. Esau has given up half of his inheritance, given to his brother for a bowl of stew. And now the only thing that Rachel needs is for her favored son, Jacob, to get the blessing as well. He already has the birthright. And now can we get him to get the blessing? Because the blessing is super important. The blessing is about God's blessing of prosperity, which also includes this idea of fertility. So my favored son, if I can have my favored son also get this favored blessing, maybe he won't experience the same sort of infertility that I have. Thus, the father's blessing is related to the chance of future progeny. And tomorrow we'll talk more about what's happening here between Rebekah and Jacob in Esau and Isaac. So there are 7 questions that Isaac has. When Jacob comes in, he puts on his Halloween costume. It's Halloween time, coming up soon. He puts up this Halloween costume to dress up as his brother, right? He puts on the goat skin, and he tries to smell like his brother, and he has his mom make some food out of goat, more of a gamey meat, to try and trick his father to get that blessing. And his father, Isaac, you can almost tell that something doesn't seem right because there's these 7 questions that he has about this. Who are you, my son? As if he doesn't know his own son. How is it you've come so quickly, my son? As in getting the meat. Please come close that I might feel you, my son, whether or not you are really my son Esau or not. The voice of Jacob, but the hands of Esau. Are you really my son Esau? Please come close and kiss me, my son. When he smelled his garments, you can smell Esau from a mile away. When you come really close, this really strong smell. He blessed him. And this had major consequences for the family. What happened to this family after this event? It split. I mean, the family was already split, right? It was already split. This was just the straw that broke the camel's back. I mean, a big straw, but the family was already split. If the family hadn't been split before, this is just the final wedge to break them apart. And this is the last time that Jacob gets to see his mother, Rebekah. Because after this, he goes off to Padamaran, and he never gets to see her again. So there are big consequences for this family. Jacob runs away to Rebekah's brother's Laban, and we know who Laban is. Laban likes camels. He's really interested in those camels and those Teslas. So we know what he's interested in. And I'm sure he found out that Jacob, he has the birthright, and he got the blessing? This is someone I want to be around, right? And he later sees that God has blessed him, and Laban tries to keep him around as long as possible. Then Esau said, is he not rightly named Jacob, for he has betrayed me these 2 times? He took away my birthright, and behold, now he's taken my blessing. And he said, have you not reserved a blessing for me? And the way the narrator describes the story is that Isaac is shaking. So at this point in time, Isaac is blind. He is shaking, and there's a superlative at the end. So he's shaking very, very much. And then Esau screams very, very loud. So we have this idea of Esau coming in expecting, I gave away my birthright, but at least I get the blessing. And he lost that too. So both people are having this loud, emotional experience about what's happening. So there's definitely some emotions happening in this family. And we see that Jacob runs up here, goes to find a wife. He puts his head on a stone. He sees the ladder going up there. And Jacob meets tender-eyed Leah and beautiful Rachel, gets tricked, and then he finds 2 wives for the fair price of 14 years of labor. So Laban says, here, you can marry my daughter, just work 7 years, and then comes to the consummation night, and then, who is this? Oh, you're not Rachel. Oh, you're Leah. Well, you tricked me, Laban. Well, typically what we do in our family, we put 2 eggs in our pancakes. We always marry off our eldest daughter first. That's just what we do. So if you want the youngest daughter, you better work 7 more years. So that's how he get these 2 wives. So Laban is definitely taking advantage of this person who's on the outs and not being very hospitable towards him. So Abraham lies to Pharaoh, and he says, this is my sibling. Why? To save his own skin. Later on, Abe lies to Abimelech. Same thing. This is my sibling. This is not my wife, this is my sibling. Why? To save his own skin. Then Isaac lies to Abimelech, uses the same exact lie about Rebekah, says, me too, this is my sibling. Why? To save his own skin. Then something happens in the next generation. Let's up the ante. Jacob, prompted by Rebekah, says to Isaac, I am my sibling, and this is his skin. And then Leah, prompted by Laban, lies to Jacob, me too, I am my sibling, and here is my skin. So who you are and who your sibling is very important in this story. And it's interesting that who the sibling is where a lot of the lies are founded upon. But God blessed tender-eyed Leah. Here's her sons, and she ends up changing some of the names. At first few names are about like, maybe now my husband will love me, and then there's a transition where she's talking about, I will praise the Lord, how fortunate I am. There are more infertility wars in Genesis 30. So in the days of the wheat harvest, Reuben went and found mandrakes in the field and brought them to his mother Leah. So mandrakes are something that's going to help with infertility. And they could be an amulet, or you can stew it in some tea, and you can drink that. It's supposed to be an aphrodisiac to help you get pregnant. And Rachel hears about that and comes to her sister, Leah, please give me some more of your son's mandrakes. But she said to her, Leah said to her, is it a small matter for you to take my husband? And would you take my son's mandrakes also? So this is very clear, if it wasn't clear before, that Jacob has a favored wife, right? He prefers Rachel. And Leah feels like Rachel has taken her husband, even though she technically married him first, even though it was through trickery, but taken him from her. And would you take my son mandrake also? So Rachel said, therefore he may lie with you tonight in return for your son's mandrakes. So Leah's in a difficult spot. She wants to have more children. So she has these mandrakes which is going to help her, but she would have to give them up to get access to her husband. So which one do I need my husband, but I don't want to give these up. So she's between a rock and a hard place. So basically what happens is there's this transaction that happens between these two sisters in these infertility wars. And if you want to learn more about mandrakes, the next slide should have that. So this is what mandrakes look like. They could be flowers. Here are these real fruits. And if you look at the roots, these roots look slightly anthropomorphic. Do you see that? So when you pull them up, do they all look like that? No. But do some of them? Yeah. So can you imagine people in the ancient Near East picking this up and go, whoa, that's a head and some arms and some legs. And these were sometimes seen as spirits or demons or had some sort of power over fertility, because if you think about it, they come from the ground, right? So Mother Earth is giving something to the mother to help the mother have children. But when you stew these and boil these are actually delirium hallucinogenic tropane alkaloids. I'm not a psychiatrist, and I will not be giving out any medication, but these are drugs. So what's happening is Leah is selling drugs to get access to her husband. That's what's happening. And that's what's happening in the family. And this is seen as, this is a solution where one of us gives drugs to the other person to get access to the partner. That's an interesting family dynamic, to say the least. There's a pastor proverb, I was swift in my revenge, I only waited 100 years. So Jacob has been off in Padam Haran, but he's eventually going to come back. He's going to run away from Laban. The question is, how is Esau, who has threatened to kill his brother, going to respond when Jacob returns? Because Esau's probably been waiting. What's going to happen? Is it going to be a safe return or not a safe return? Genesis 31, Jacob runs with his family to Canaan, and he's caught by, where are my idols, Laban. If you remember the story, Jacob and Leah and Rachel decide, let's get up and go right now. Let's leave your father Laban because he's mistreated us. So they run off. Laban finds out and gets on his horseback with his men and chases after them. When he catches up with them, he says, why have you taken my daughters, and where are my household idols? And he's looking around the camp, and Jacob makes this huge show, like, what? If you will not find these idols in my camp, I swear by it. So Jacob looks in every single tent, but in one tent he goes in, and his daughter Rachel is sitting on the saddle of a camel, and she says, I'm in my time of month, you can't come in here. And in the saddlebags are those little gods, those little idols. So Laban's not actually able to go in to search that because he's not allowed to, right? Jacob makes this big show as if this had just been Rachel's idea. But I don't think this was just Rachel's idea, because later on in the story, there's another mention of these idols, and there's no mention of Jacob going, "What? Where'd these come from?" It's not a surprise to him. So I wouldn't be surprised if this is something that he made this big bravado, like protest that he doesn't know what's going on, similar to how Peter in the New Testament made this big protest, like, "I don't know this Messiah, I don't know who this Nazarene is," but we know that he was actually really connected with him, right? I wonder if the same sort of thing might be happening in this story. Jacob's afraid of Esau's 400. He wrestles with God. His name is changed to Israel. A new name reunites with Esau. And echoes of the prodigal son. When you read Genesis 33, this is very similar to the prodigal son in Luke in the way that they meet. Genesis 34, Dinah, Leah and Jacob's daughter, was sexually assaulted. And the town of Shechem, the prince of Shechem, sexually assaulted her. And then he comes and he wants to marry her. And he comes to try and barter to marry Dinah. And Jacob is very, very passive. In fact, in this chapter, Jacob is named as Jacob, not as Israel. Even though his name was changed to Israel, the narrator uses his old name, Jacob. And Jacob doesn't do very much to stand up for his daughter. In fact, it's later on that there's this conversation between Levi and Simeon saying, "Okay, that's fine, but all of the town of Shechem needs to get circumcised. After you're circumcised, then you can marry her." So they'll get circumcised, then they go in with swords and they kill everybody. Gruesome story. And the complaint that Jacob, again, Jacob, not Israel, said to Simeon and Levi, "You have brought trouble upon me by making me a stench to the Canaanites and the Perizzites, the people of this land. We are few in number. If they unite against me and attack me, I and my house will be destroyed." He says, me, I. A lot of focus on himself, right? Not focused on caring for his family. But they replied, "Should you have treated our sister like a prostitute?" So the sons and the narrator are showing that Jacob is just interested in himself. That's what he's always kind of been interested in. So what is Jacob and Israel about now? The rest of the narrative is like, who is this person? Is he going to stand up for other people? Or is he most interested in his own endeavors and his own purposes? In Genesis 35, Jacob takes and buries the family idols. No surprise of finding them in his tents, nothing. He just buries them. So I wonder if he's actually known this was actually happening. Rachel dies, Benjamin is born. Reuben sleeps with Bilhah, which is the midwife of Rachel. And so Reuben is saying after Rachel passes away, Reuben sleeps with Bilhah. Again, Jacob does nothing. He doesn't want to ruffle any feathers. Before he was willing to do all this trickery, and all of a sudden, he's not willing to do that sort of thing. He's not willing to stand up for other people. He's just interested in himself. He doesn't want to make waves. Jacob is again renamed Israel. God reminds him who his new name is. He wrestled contended with God. And can't you handle your own family? I think that this is a critique on Jacob. Why isn't he taking care of his family? Jacob sees his father Isaac again, but never sees Rebekah. And then we have a list of Esau's descendants. We're getting near the end of Genesis. Here we go. So here's the catching up. Here's the rest of the family tree. So we have Jacob and Leah and Zilpah, and then Rachel and Bilhah. So here are the biological sons from this group. So kind of filling out the family tree. Joseph is different from his brothers in several ways. One, he's a tattletale. And you don't tattletale on your brothers unless you want to get some ire from your brothers in return. He's a tattletale. He is clearly Israel or Jacob's favorite. It's clear that Jacob loved Joseph. He is the firstborn from Israel's favorite wife, right? Because we knew that Jacob loved Rachel. He is gifted a coat of many colors, or a royal coat would be another translation. So he has some special garbs. He is not assigned the same sort of labor responsibilities. All the other sons are supposed to have to go out and make sure the sheep and the goats get the food they need, but he's able to stay home. In fact, in the story we're about to talk about, he is sent from home, "Go find your brothers." So he gets to stay at home in the Cush land of his father, wearing the special coat. He also has dreams, right? And not only does he have dreams, he shows and shares those dreams with his family. So in many ways, he is setting himself apart and different from his brothers. In Genesis 37:4, and his brothers saw that their father loved him, that's Joseph, more than all of his brothers, and so they hated him and could not speak to him on friendly terms. So this is them coming to the Thanksgiving dinner, and I can't even look at you right now. I'm not even going to ask for the mashed potatoes. I'm going to take them, but we're not going to talk. So the brothers have this jealousy about what's happening and the resentment towards their brother. So instead of telling Joseph to stop saying he's better than them, or maybe just stealing his coat, or telling their father that favoritism is hurtful, instead they decide to sell Joseph into slavery. If you remember the story, they see him from a long way off, and the brothers are lying in wait. And this is the second time that someone is described as lying in wait. The first time was in Genesis chapter 4, when Cain is talking with God, and God is saying, sin is at the door, lying in wait. But you have to master it. So there's this idea that now these sons are lying in wait. And it's clear that they said they're going to kill him. So everyone knows this is the plan. Reuben steps in and says, maybe don't kill him. Just throw him in the cistern, which is a well. And the word for well is the same in Hebrew, whether it's filled with water or not. So the context shows. So it's an empty cistern. And even animals are not safe when this family wants something for themselves. What does that mean? When Jacob deceived his father Isaac, what did he do? He killed a goat, and he put goat skin on, right? To deceive his father. In this situation, the boys tear up that special coat of many colors, dip it in blood, they had to kill an animal for that, and then present that as evidence that the son has passed away. So animals aren't even safe when this family is trying to get their way. So then there's this interlude of Judah and Tamar. Then Joseph prospers in Egypt. Then he's imprisoned. And then the dreamer becomes the interpreter for Pharaoh. Joseph becomes the viceroy of Egypt and stores food. And then all of a sudden, there's another famine in the land. In every single generation, there's been a famine in the land. In this situation, Israel, Jacob and his sons need to get some more food. So sends down these boys to go down to Egypt. He heard there's been some food down in Egypt, which luckily Joseph is one who's been planning to store all this food. Boys come down, and Joseph seems to have prescient knowledge more than he should about what's going on. And the boys come up, and he says, you are spies in the land. No, we're not. You are spies in the land. You tell me about these 12 sons, but where's the youngest one, right? Where's the youngest one? I believe you're a spy. I'm going to imprison all of you unless someone goes back to bring that youngest son to me. And he ends up imprisoning Simeon, and everyone else goes back up, and he sends them with their grain. And lo and behold, as they're going back up to bring grain back to their father, they look in their sacks, and he has returned all the money into their sacks. So they're concerned, oh boy, I went down to try and buy food, and this person who's threatened my family and held one of us captive as we go back, he's given us his money back. I hope he doesn't think that we've stolen this. We go back to the father. They eventually run out of food again because it's a long famine, and eventually Israel is in a difficult spot. He's heard about what's happened. He doesn't want to let go of his new favorite son, Benjamin, right, Benji, but he also needs food. So what do? Do I preserve access to my child, or do I get access to food? So now all of a sudden there's this one point in this narrative where we have challenges of food or child, whereas before it was famine and infertility. So now you have this interesting choice. Do I not have food for my family, but keep my child, or do you give my child away, maybe have food for my family? So Joseph seats them in birth order. They finally take Benjamin. They go back down to Egypt, and they are brought to Joseph's house. And Joseph seats them in birth order, and which they're surprised at. How did he know this? And he gives them food, and he gives Benjamin 5 times the amount of food of everyone else. And they start to think something is funky here. What's happening here? And he sends them away with food, but he puts the cup for his divination, quote unquote, in Benjamin's sack. So he sends them off back home. And as soon as they start going back home, Joseph sends his servant, run after them, stop them, look in all of their sacks, and see if you can find this divination cup. So servant comes, stops them, and they say, it's not in our sacks, you're crazy. He looks at all the sacks, and lo and behold, he opens the last sack into Benjamin's sack. He finds the divination cup. Here's where the story is really interesting to me. The boys tear their clothes. Why is this important? Because 7 chapters earlier, they tore Joseph's clothes, and when they told the father tore his clothes. In fact, Simeon, when he found out they had sold Joseph into slavery, he also tore his clothes. So several people's clothes have gotten torn, right? Except for these brothers. And this response of tearing their clothes, I think, tells us quite a bit about them now compared to then. Imagine There's this favorite son, the new favorite, Benjamin. He's such a brat. He's our father's favorite son. He has to come with us down to Egypt. Oh no, he was caught with the divination cup. Oh no, I'm sorry, Father, but the viceroy of Egypt decided to take him into prison. There's nothing we could do about it. We have no control over this. What a perfect reason to also lose their youngest brother. But instead, that's not their response, is it? They tear their clothes. And they say, no, we are all going back. You're not just going to take him. I think Joseph was testing the family, testing to see what their response would be to someone who is a favored son in the family. Because he knew how he was treated, but it's clear they are treating the new favored son, Benjamin, very differently. So, bird's eye view. What are some of Abraham's family rules? What are the intergenerational patterns of behavior? So what are the patterns that are passed down from generation to generation? How does the family handle anxiety and tension? Who are the villains and who are the heroes? Here we go. So here's the family tree. Here's the big payoff. Defiance. Here's the first theme. In every generation, there are individuals who are defiant. I put the big D for defiant. These individuals are defiant. Hagar, Ishmael, Esau, and these sons. Defiance. Every generation, there is lying happening. Let's notice these individuals, Abram, Sarah, Isaac, Rebekah, Laban, Jacob, Rachel, Gad, Asher sons, Joseph, Benjamin, Dan, Naphtali. There's lying happening here. Let's look at who the people who are defiant and those people who are lying. Let's just look at those. And look at those characters and look at who sometimes are seen as the villain in the family and who are seen as the heroes in the family. Let's keep going. Here's the conflict. In every single generation, there is conflict. In the marital unit, there is conflict. There's conflict between the parents and the children. In every single generation, there is conflict. Favoritism for the youngest offspring. In every single generation, there is clear favoritism in a maladaptive way, in an unhealthy way, favoritism for the youngest offspring. So we have defiance, lying, conflict, favoritism. Extreme manipulation in every single generation. There's extreme manipulation, I'd also say, between Sarah and Hagar as well. So every single generation, there's extreme manipulation. Look like a fun family to be in, yeah? In every single generation, people are run away, or kicked out, or they run away from something. So, run away from Sarah, kicked out from Sarah, kicked out from Sarah. Then Jacob runs away from Esau, then runs away from Laban. Joseph is kicked out of the family. So I sometimes wonder, is Abram running from something in Ur? And I wonder if he's running from the infertility. Trying to find another place. If I can get to a new place, a new context, start a new situation, maybe me and my wife will have a different experience. So cut off, either running away or kicked out, that's one way the family solves problems. Get rid of the other family member. Send them off, kick them out, or run away themselves. And there's this big unrepaired rift between Isaac and Ishmael. And we know through the millennia, there has been this unrepaired rift between the Muslim and the Judeo-Christian communities, right? This decision right here has a big butterfly effect down the generations. It didn't just affect this family, it's affecting all of our families even now, right? Because the idea was, how do we solve the problem? Kick someone out. That's a nice expedient solution, but that doesn't actually solve the underlying problem. We're going to be talking about that again a little bit more tomorrow. So, who are the villains, who are the heroes? So who are the clear villains? Give me a clear villain in the story. Who's a villain? Ooh, is it quiet because you don't want to have the wrong answer? Simeon, they're bad because they killed the whole city, right? Right. They're bad. They tricked the whole city, then they killed the whole. They are bad, right? But they were also the only two who were willing to try and stand up to protect their sister. Okay, good. Give me someone else who's a villain.
Esau.
What? Good. Why is Esau a villain?
He wanted to kill his brother.
He wanted to kill his brother, right? His brother. He said he wanted to kill his brother. But is that what happened later on in the story? Did he come out to kill him? No, he came out and he embraced him, right? So is he a villain? Give me someone else. Who's a villain in the family? Laban. Why is Laban a villain? Okay, he's a villain. Okay. He changed his wages 7 times. He take advantage of the situation, right? So he's a villain. Who else might be a villain? Sarah. Why is Sarah the villain? Who said that? Why is Sarah the villain?
She kicks out the person that she asked to do something.
Yeah. And you're not allowed to change your mind. No. Not allowed to change your mind. No. She's a villain. But she's also someone who's under quite a bit of distress, right? And we know when people are distressed, sometimes they make decisions that are not in accordance with their values, right? So because she did that one thing, she's a villain? Okay. Every behavior is a symptom of the system, right? Every behavior is a symptom of the system. Who's another villain? Rebecca. Why is Rebecca a villain?
She was the catalyst to have her son.
Yeah, the puppet master behind the scenes doing this sort of thing, right? And she's cut from the same cloth as Laban. We already identified him as a villain. So maybe Rebecca's a villain too. Oops, not yet. Don't want to give that away yet. Someone else I'm thinking about. Reuben. Why Reuben? Bill. It's actually.
He's the one that brought the mandrakes,
Uh-huh.
and then his mother bribed.
Yes.
with her husband.
Oh, see the key role that Reuben is playing? But the mandrakes also sleep. So he is trying to stir up drama. Okay. Yeah.
When she died.
Yeah. But maybe he's just trying to make things right. Maybe he's like, my mother's not getting the same sort of attention. She needs some help. And my father is not standing up for the rest of the family, so I'm going to stake my claim as I should be the leader of the family. He's trying to infuse some strength into the family instead of weak-willed Israel. What about the sons of Israel, the ones who sold Joseph away? They're often seen as villains, right? How dare you do that to your brother? But if you think about the deceit, the trickery, the plan to kill and sell him off and to make a profit, all those things we have seen in the previous generations. They're doing nothing new. They're following the same old playbook, the sweet magnum opus in Abraham's mafia family. They're pulling it all together. And so in some ways, they're the quintessential family members. They're just following the rules of the family because every behavior is a symptom of the system. So there's always conflict in the marital unit. The younger son receives the blessing in every generation. There's always conflict between siblings. And it seems the overarching principle for this family is do whatever is expedient. What can I do right now that will benefit me? And they're willing to sacrifice people and friendships and relationships to kick other people out. Do whatever is expedient. And if we have the same sort of approach in our families, do whatever is expedient, people are going to get hurt. There's going to be rifts in the family. There's going to be divisions in the family. So whatever we refuse to acknowledge, we will undoubtedly and unconsciously pass on to others. So I'm hoping to increase some insight into this family. And if we can see this sort of thing happen in their family, we can see the same sort of thing happen in our family. I'm guessing our own family genogram isn't going to be crystal clean and pure like well water. There's going to be some messiness, right? Maybe some repeated patterns, and every behavior is a symptom of the system. Our behaviors that we learned in our family of origin, we repeat those. And if we don't increase insight into the fact that we are repeating those, we will undoubtedly and unconsciously pass that on to other people in the future generations. If we want to make changes in the next generation, we don't make changes in them, we make changes in ourselves. If we can change ourselves, then there's a chance there can be changes in the subsequent generations. So, we're near the end, but I want to compare Abraham versus Isaac versus Jacob life satisfaction. Because when there's anxiety that's passed down from generation to generation and unresolved conflict that is passed down from generation to generation, that anxiety just kind of accumulates. Genesis 25:7. These are all the years of Abraham's life that he lived, 175 years. Abraham breathed his last and died at a good old age, an old man and satisfied with life. And he was gathered to his people. Later on, 10 chapters later. Now the days of Isaac were 180 years. 5 years more. Then Isaac breathed his last and died and was gathered to his people, an old man of ripe age. What's different between this and this? Satisfied with life. Good. Later on, about 10 chapters later, Pharaoh is asking Jacob about his experience. So Jacob said to Pharaoh, "The years of my living abroad are 130. Few and unpleasant have been the years of my life, nor have they attained the years my fathers lived during the days living abroad." So what's different here compared to the previous two? Say it one more time. Misery, right. When we fail to resolve conflict in our family in one generation, we will pass that on to the next generation to deal with. In fact, a lot of the stress we are dealing with now is old. It's been passed down from generation to generation, and we are receiving it like a precious family heirloom. But it's not just the distress, it's also the behavior patterns that keep it locked in our family system. A lot of stuff we struggle with is old, and if we don't think about that, we don't address it, we're going to pass that on to other people. Too many people spend their lives being dutiful descendants instead of being good ancestors. Dutiful descendants meaning you follow the previous rules. The responsibility of each generation is not to please their predecessors, it's to improve things for their offspring. It's more important to make your children proud than your parents proud. Okay, very end of Genesis, swapping of the hands. So Jacob is old and his eyesight is passing, just like Isaac's, his father's was. And when it was told to Jacob, "Behold, your son Joseph has come to you," Israel collected his strength and sat up in bed. So we have this old man sitting up in bed. And then Jacob said to Joseph, "God Almighty appeared to me at Luz in the land of Canaan and blessed me. And he said to me, 'Behold, I will make you fruitful and numerous.'" The promise of God, fruit infertility will become fruitful. "And I will make you a multitude of peoples. And I will give you this land," here descends again, this land and the children, "after you as an everlasting possession. Now your 2 sons who were born to you in the land of Egypt before I came to you in Egypt, these 2 sons are mine. Ephraim and Manasseh shall be mine." So Israel is saying, "I'm adopting your 2 sons, whether you like it or not. I'm adopting your 2 sons. They shall be mine just as Reuben and Simeon are. So now I have 2 more sons. But your children that you fathered after them shall be yours, and you shall be called by the names of their brothers and their inheritance." And then Israel does this interesting little side conversation that I find interesting given this context. Now, as for me, so he's talking about God's promise, how he's adopted Joseph's 2 sons. "As for me, when I came from Paddan Aram, Rachel died, to my sorrow, in the land of Canaan on the journey, when there was still some distance to go to Ephrath. I buried her there on the way to Ephrath." Why does he bring this up? Why does he bring up the passing of his favored wife? I don't know for sure. My best guess is he's just adopted these 2 children from Joseph. So now he has Joseph, Benjamin, Ephraim, and Manasseh are all children of Rachel. Do we see that? Rachel was never as fertile as Leah, and I'm sure that was challenging for her. So I wonder if there's a way he's trying to give Rachel 2 more children that she was not able to have. I don't know if that's what's happening, but it's just really interesting there. And then after this, now the eyes of Israel were so dim from age that he could not see, and Joseph brought them close to him, and he kissed them and embraced them. And Israel said to Joseph, "I never expected to see your face, and behold, God has let me see your children, which are now my children as well." And Joseph took them both, Ephraim with his right hand towards Israel's left, and Manasseh on his left hand toward Israel's right, and brought them close to him. But Israel reached out his right hand, and placed it on the head of Ephraim, who was the younger, and his left hand on Manasseh's head, crossing his hands, although Manasseh was the firstborn. This is a mouthful, but the narrator wants to make it super clear that Joseph put the eldest on the right side and the youngest on the correct side. And super clear that Israel purposefully crossed his hands to bless the younger one, right? Imagine if this is what would have happened in the previous generation. Imagine if Isaac tells Esau, "Go out and bring the game," when when Isaac tells Esau, go bring the game, and then Esau comes back, and then Isaac says, now hold on a second, go get your brother, bring him here. So he has the eldest and the youngest. And then he crosses his hands, what might happen? When Joseph saw that his father placed his right hand on Ephraim's head, it displeased him. He was upset. So he grabbed his father's hand to move it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's head, and Joseph said to his father, not so, my father, for this one is the firstborn. Place your right hand on his head. But his father Israel refused and said, I know, my son, I know. He also will become a people, and he will also be great. However, his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his descendants shall become a multitude of nations. This is the exact same thing that Isaac could have said to Jacob and Esau had he swapped his hands. If he had swapped his hands, Esau might approach it. But father, you have the wrong hand on the wrong person. I know, my son. For you also become a great people. You become great, but your younger brother shall be greater than you, and his descendants shall become a multitude of nations. And if he would have done that, the family could have avoided a whole bunch of problems, right? Wouldn't have had to split up. We never had to deal with Laban. They could have all been one big happy family. I mean, sure, Esau would have protested, but Joseph got over it. Esau could have gotten over it. And if we would have done that instead of this, very different family history. Very different family history. So, closing theological reflections. I promised I would get back to this. Number one, God chose to make and remake his covenant with imperfect people in an imperfect family with lots of family drama. Right? This is not a model family, right? Just like our families are not necessarily model families, if those exist. People seem to work really, really hard, even taking advantage of others, to obtain or protect God's already promised blessings. Yet sometimes they also seem to put that promise in jeopardy. In fact, all this family drama, people having to run away, then come back and steal and cheat, all this stuff. I mean, God promised this land to Abram and his descendants, and then Jacob has to run away from that land because he thinks he's going to be killed. So he leaves the land that was promised to him. Eventually he comes back. Then all the brothers have to go down to Egypt to get some food. So there's this, people are moving away from this land that God has promised them, and part of that is their own doing. God works even harder to not let our dysfunction ruin his covenant. It's righteousness by faith for a reason, not righteousness by works. If it was righteousness by works, this family may not cut the mustard, right? But if it comes to faith, people in this family excel at faith, right? Sometimes the actions of one person can change a family tree. Sometimes we can change within the family. Sometimes if there's too much toxicity, we have to remove ourselves from that family so we can heal and grow. Joseph was kicked out, but because of where he was placed and the power he was given and the place at the right time, he was able to not just save his family, but save all the surrounding families, whoever came down to get food in Egypt. And he seems to be of a different character than some of his other brothers. Sometimes we have to grow as an individual separate from our family so that we can return back to our family as a stronger person. So often we're not getting out of the dysfunctional emotional or behavioral patterns until we get clear of those toxic systems, whether it's families, organizations, churches, relationships in which we're enmeshed. Hard to heal when the relational oxygen we're breathing every day is polluted. Sometimes we have to get out of a certain situation to grow. Sometimes we can grow in the situation, and sometimes it's hard to know which of those we're supposed to do. But whenever there's conflict, the solution is not always someone has to leave. That's what happened in this family. Someone's got to go. There's tension, someone's got to go. But we know that did not help the situation long term. It was expedient, it was immediate, but it didn't necessarily help that family. So Jeremiah 31:29, in those days they will not say again, the fathers who've eaten sour grapes and the children's teeth are set on edge. So what stuff did you notice in Abraham's family that I missed? How might this change the way you see Abraham's family going forward? And how might this change the way you see your own family or romantic relationships? So what do you notice in Abraham's family that I missed? Let's tap into the wisdom of the room.
God actually called him out of Ur. So when you said that perhaps he left for a certain reason, maybe there were reasons that he's willing to do what God said.
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes God calls us out of specific context. Chris and I were talking about ministry earlier today, and we were talking about how God's calling, and sometimes we think we fit well in a certain context, but we need to be open to God calling us out of that context to go somewhere else. Or sometimes we know a certain context does not fit us well, and we're just waiting for God to call us. But sometimes God calls us to stay in a certain context, right? And not just to run away and leave. And sometimes it's hard to know exactly what to do in those situations. Good. What else? What else did you notice in Abraham's family? How might this change the way you see Abraham's family? How might this change the way you see your own family?
I think Joseph being a parallel of Jesus Christ, because Jesus was treated the same way as Joseph, betrayed by his brothers,
Mm-hmm.
by his church community,
Mm-hmm.
and they had to get rid of him for the best of the group, like one sacrifice.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Joseph is sometimes called the Christ of the Old Testament for that, for all those parallels. Absolutely. So obviously in these genograms, I was noticing the dysfunction in the families, right? But families aren't only dysfunctional, right? There's a lot of adaptive behaviors and functional stuff within the family. So what are some functional things that might have been also passed down from generation to generation? Deception? Okay, tell me more.
Well, Abraham lied to save himself, and so did his son,
Mm-hmm.
and so did Jacob.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So might have been a pattern there to save their own skin. And sometimes this is written off as like, oh, they're just trying to save their own skin. Sometimes it's seen as, well, if they would have had faith, they wouldn't have had to lie. And it's not always clear if they were supposed to lie or not to lie. In fact, sometimes there's no comment on that at all from the narrator. In fact, the narrator is not even as interested in some of this stuff. The narrator obviously is more interested in God's character compared to humanity's character. Because there's humanity characters that is repeated in generation to generation, but what about God's character that is repeated in generation to generation? What do we see about God in each generation? He keeps working with messed up people. He doesn't give up, even if some people are kicked out of the family. He keeps working with them. And he doesn't just work with the preferred children, he also blesses Ishmael. He also blesses Esau. He doesn't just choose the people that we choose.
The commandment that says, visiting the sins of the fathers upon the third and fourth generation, then that showing mercy to thousands of them that love me and keep my commandment. Abraham demonstrated that.
Mm-hmm. And God wants to make it clear, I want my grace to extend farther than dysfunction. Good. What else do you notice in Abraham's family that I missed? How might this change the way you see Abraham's family, and how might this change the way you see your own family or your own romantic relationships?
One of the things that has always struck me about the Abraham, Isaac, Jacob scenario is God did not hide our faults. He did not hide their faults.
No, he did not hide their faults.
I don't see God as condemning Abraham, Isaac, or Jacob. I'm not saying he excused the wrong, it's wrong. But he's trying to show that sometimes it's not the fact that we went down the wrong road, it's the fact that when he shows us the right road, we go back to him.
Mm-hmm.
That we, by faith, we hold on to him in spite of it, because obviously they were experiencing things that no one else had experienced at that time. It's easy for us to say now because we're looking after.
Mm-hmm.
So I see God's grace throughout all of this. God's working to save us, to help us. So it's encouraging.
Mm-hmm.
Very encouraging.
And God's bar of willingness to work with people is pretty low, right? No matter what you do, he's willing to work with you, right? It's not like, I don't know if I want to touch that. But imagine inviting this family over to your Thanksgiving dinner, what that would be like, having multiple generations in the same house, around the same table or tables. The tension in the room and how dysfunctional that family is, but again, our families are also experiencing dysfunction. And it's really easy sometimes to point out the dysfunction in other people's families, but that's just because they decide to put 3 eggs in their pancakes, and we do too, right? Or they decide to put whole wheat instead of bleached flour, whatever. There's just differences in the families, and it's really easy to point out things that we don't like in other families, but we really need to spend more time looking at the dysfunctional patterns in our own families. Because if we can do that, we can change our families. We can't change other people's families. We don't have control of other people. At least I don't. I'm not powerful enough to have control of other people. In fact, I can barely take care of myself on a good day. So focus on yourself and your own family and your own patterns. That's where you make changes, not meddling in other people's family. I'm not saying you do that, but as soon as we start to try and mess with other people's families, it may not be helping. In fact, you might be doing it because it's going to make you feel more comfortable, you, outside of the family, more comfortable if you see changes in their family. So if someone, an outsider, trying to come in and make these changes, uninvited, unsolicited advice, sometimes it's better just to focus on your own stuff. And then if you can do so, and you recognize that every behavior is a symptom of the system, then instead of blaming one person or 2 people, everyone in the system has responsibility for this. We think about the sons selling Joseph, slavery down to Egypt, and tearing up his cloak and giving it to his father. Sometimes they're seen as the bad person, but they're just carrying what's been happening in the previous generation. So in some ways, everyone in that family bears responsibility for allowing these behaviors to continue to happen. Again, if you want to make changes in future generations, you make them in yourselves. Okay, we are done for tonight. I'll be here tomorrow morning for Sabbath church at 9 and 11:15, is that correct? And then 1:30 and 3:15. And I'm happy to entertain questions, but we are officially done for tonight. Thank you. Let's pray. Father God, you are so good and so different from us. Yet, you want us to be with you, despite our background, despite our families, despite our challenges. You want us with you. I thank you for never giving up on us and wanting to continually remake your covenant with us and show us how faithful you are, despite how dysfunctional we can be. Help us reach out to you, latch onto you, trust you, grow in you, and rest in your peace. Amen.
Tomorrow morning at 9 or 11:15, it's going to be same content, both services. After our second service, we'll have a fellowship meal, so come and enjoy some food with us, and then we'll continue at 1:30 tomorrow afternoon. Have a marvelous evening, get some good rest, and we'll see you in the morning.